What's your I don't want you as a friend anymore moment? When did you realize that someone was not a good friend towards you? Story 1. Story I've told before. My best mate in high school, top bloke, shirt off your back kind of fella. We experienced everything together. All the pre- and post-pubescent stuff, first frick around with illegal stuff, drugs, drinks, you name it. At the time, both of us were heavily involved in trafficking weed through our respective schools, and due to my size, I was a debt collector of sorts for kids who had stiffed the local dealers. Then, through an unfortunate series of events, I cleaned myself up and dropped anything that wasn't legal. Doug, though, he was having too much fun doing his thing. We still caught up as often, but this time I was just on the P, not shooting gear or smoking dope. He would always ask, I would always decline. This ticked him off, to the point he cut contact with me one day, really abruptly. Didn't feel the need to pursue a reason. Fast forward about 10 years, Ma rings me, tells me that Doug had rocked up at my folks asking to catch up and bury the hatchet as he was clean. So she gave him my address, and he was coming over. The missus didn't know about Doug and was fast asleep anyway, so I just left the door open a crack so I could hear his car pull up. Had a really bad feeling about it though, to the point where I grabbed the pacifier, a length of thick red gum I'd fashioned into a cudgel from my high school woodworking days, that I usually keep near the door, and slid it hidden from sight near the couch. Still don't know why. Moments later, I hear a car pull up. I went outside to meet him and could immediately tell something was up. Firstly, Doug was freaking flying, pupils like 5-cent pieces. So much for being clean. Second, instead of his crappy Holden we used to bomb around Broady in, he was driving some old Volvo. Now I know his family was the same as mine, pretty much bogan, welfare, and diehard Holden lovers, so it struck as odd as heck. We used to nick a few cars for insurance jobs back in the day too. Dang, I haven't thought about that in years. Anyway, after an awkward handshake, I motioned him around the back to the shed, basically my man cave. Hit the lights, grab a beer, and toss one over to him. Frick me, he had had a rough time. Thin as a whip now, a couple of dodgy neck and facial tats. He was pretty fidgety, I guess from the gear he was obviously on. He was rambling about his stint inside, not surprising, how his family had all moved back up north, and how he was clean now. I stopped him there and called him out. Basically, I said BS. I can't remember exactly what I said. He insisted it was from cold medicine or something. The whole time he was looking around the shed, but only at certain things. Expensive things, power tools, gym kit. My gun is safe in particular. I didn't like where this was going, so I told him we can catch up later in the week or something. I gotta go to bed. He was cool with that, smiled, patted me on the back, and jumped back in his car after I walked him out. I stuck my head in to say see ya, checked the ignition. Of course, there was no key. Couple of days later, I noticed the gun safe had pry marks on the paint. Now this fricker is locked up good. Solid steel, anchored to the concrete. It ain't opening unless I open it. Aussie law is pretty hardcore with that stuff. Call up the cops, tell them what happened. They come around and have a squiz. I let them know I'm pretty sure I know who tried to open it. Gave him Doug's full name, left it at that. Haven't heard from the bloke in nearly 15 years. Frankly, I don't care if I do. As an update to this, he passed away last year. About 6 people from memory, including myself, at his funeral. Burnt a lot of bridges, apparently. Story 2. There was this guy at work that I became friends with. We weren't super close to each other necessarily, but we hung out with the same group of friends. One day he asked me if he could borrow $60 so he could buy a new phone. I was like, yeah, okay. Never saw that $60 again. This was when I became a little weary of him. We went with said group of friends to Vegas, and he tried to act all alpha in the group, despite having to have some of his meals paid for him by others because he left his wallet in the room. He'd put the same routine every now and then would go to the movies or to a restaurant. Eventually, the chick he was living with, supposedly his girlfriend, kicks him out of the house. At the time, we suspected that she was being a typical crazy girlfriend and just kicking him out for attention. He then asked to move in with one of my other friends. They were living together for about 6 to 7 months, and he didn't pay his fair share of the rent for maybe 3 of those months. In months he did pay, he was short, so my friend had to pay for his share and whatever penalties that accrued from being late due to having to scrounge up the money. Eventually the lease is up, his name wasn't even on it, he was just crashing, and this mofo has the audacity to not pay his rent payment. Instead he goes to Vegas for his birthday with some other friends, who pay for his weekend. This is the type of leech mofo type of person I have absolutely no respect for. At this point, I couldn't get past all the BS he has been pulling, and I would just snap at him whenever he tried to sound cool or whatever. It all came to a head on New Year's Eve this year. I got super drunk, and my patience was at an all-time low. He made one remark about me not being able to hang alcohol-wise, and this was when I called him out on all his stuff and eventually severed the relationship. Some of my friends still hang out with him, telling me to just suck it up and leave it in the past, but I don't think I'll ever be able to look beyond all the previous BS. People like that will always be toxic to me. Story 3. When she was giving me a ride back from a lunch we had just had, we saw an ex of mine casually strolling down the sidewalk. She honked and waved and asked if I would mind getting off a few bricks short of my apartment so she could go back and pick him up and chat. I was a little annoyed, but said sure, just drop me at the next street. She then started talking about how excited she was to see him after all these years. It had been about 6 years since the ex and I dated, and how it was perfect timing because she had just broken up with her husband and some random intercourse was just the thing to cheer her up. I asked why specifically she wanted to do it with him, and she told me about this time when he and I were fighting. She totally thought it was okay. I just looked at her and said nothing. She said, "It's okay, you guys were fighting. I didn't think you would mind." Okay. I got out of the car and walked about 10 minutes to my apartment in a stupor, and when I was home, I realized my ex and I had only ever had one big fight. A fight she started by suggesting to him I was cheating with an ex of mine. I wasn't. So all those years later, I realized she started a fight between us so she could sleep with my boyfriend. What the actual frick? I never returned any of her calls and just cut her out of my life. I see her from time to time and I'm cordial, but not friendly. She's been one of my best friends since I was a teenager. I knew she was fickle, but at that moment I knew she was a backstabbing witch on top of it. Story 4. I have this friend who's pretty good at making friends. In fact, she has many. She's this bubbly, happy person. When you get to know her, though, you realize she's not exactly the most charming person ever. A few things I don't like about her. She uses the fact that she bought me a drink a while back as leverage to get me to do stuff for her. She threatens me with R whenever I disagree with her about something. I'm a guy, and she says she'll send her gay friends after me to R me. She constantly talks crap about other people from her friend circle when they're not around, and then be all smiles and hugs when they are. One time she forgot her school ID, and she yelled at the security guard for not letting her in. She was then complaining about how poopy our university's system was. She made fun of the victims of a recent terrorist attack on one part of our country. She turns a blind eye to anything that doesn't directly affect her. I don't want anyone like that to be my friend. Story 5. I had a friend who I thought enjoyed my company and always had a great time hanging out, but it was hard to get him to hang out, and he'd generally only do it when it was himself asking to do it. Seemed impossible to get him to commit to plans of any kind. We didn't hang out for probably 2 years until we randomly hung out again. He talked about wanting to do it again the following week, which I took seriously, then canceled 2 weeks in a row at the last minute, and by that I mean that he never mentioned it again. And when I'd bring it up when the time came, he'd have some excuse. It had hit me before that he probably didn't like seeing me much, but I really accepted it at that point. I reflected on how many times I was blown off that I realized that I liked his company more than he liked mine, and decided that it was best to unofficially end the friendship. There was no drama or betrayal in this story. I just don't want to be that person that people put up with to be nice. I'd rather be alone. I never technically cut ties as there's no need to. I've done the same with most family members. You just don't reach out to them and they quickly forget that you exist. Story 6. When I was about 10 years old, the neighbor kid and I were playing King of the Castle or something on another neighbor's huge and honestly quite bad butt swing set. The thing was like 3 stories high. No way anyone would build something like that for kids nowadays. Anyway, we got into some kind of silly disagreement. I cannot for the life of me remember what it was about, but he was on top of the play structure and I was on the ground. I was pretending to threaten him with this board, and he reached into the back of his pants and threw something at me. I held the board up in front of my face to block whatever was coming, and heard the thump of something soft and wet. I turned the board over and saw that my friend had just thrown a piece of his own doo-doo at me. He was cackling away on top of the tower, and I just dropped the board and walked home. The next day, he rang the doorbell to see if I could come to play, and I told him no. I said I'd rather watch cartoons. I don't think I ever played with him again. Story 7. Was friends with this kid in middle school. We didn't talk once while in high school because he moved to another county. I moved to another state. We moved on. In 2015, he hit me up on Facebook and immediately asked me for money and even tried to get me involved into what I'm sure was a Ponzi scheme. Blocked him after the 5th time he asked me for money. The thing is, had he even attempted to converse with me, I maybe would have done it. Our Facebook chat consists of me, hey, me 6 months later, dude, me 2 years later, hey, him a year later starts nagging for money. Story 8. when I realized my best friend from high school only kept me around as the ugly friend. I was a bit of an ugly duckling in school, kinda overweight, I have thick curly hair, and hadn't figured out how to get it to behave. I got into college and lost weight, figured out how to do my hair and makeup. My best friend suddenly started being really mean, saying stuff like, "I liked you better when you were fat," or "Why are you trying so hard?" Turns out she had an eating disorder and my weight loss was triggering her. Not to sound heartless, but having an eating disorder doesn't give you a free pass to bully your friends and make them feel bad for trying to better themselves. We aren't friends anymore. My life has been much better without that kind of toxic behavior. Story 9. As she was complaining about having to make awkward small talk with a classmate of ours that rode the same bus as her, I confessed that I had a crush on him. A few weeks later, he was one of her best friends, and her life felt empty when he went on a trip. She also said that she deserved better than everyone else in our class. She was okay with me, my crush, and her actual best friend getting better grades than her, but she was ticked off when one of my other friends got a 100% on an exam and she didn't. Apparently, my friend didn't deserve the good grade, even though she answered all the questions correctly. And she would also point at random people and talk loudly about how they were fake designer clothes and bags. Story 10. I was in middle school. I had about $20 a month as an allowance from my parents. My friends and I went to the movies one day, and on the way there, my friend at the time asked to borrow a bus ticket that was $2.50. I lent it to her with no questions asked. On the way back, she asked again, and I gave it to her again. On the bus, she was talking to another friend of ours and giggling and looking towards me. I was confused and asked them what she was giggling about. My other friend later on told me that she had bus tickets all along and just wanted freebies for me. The worst part was that she laughed at me because I was kind to her. I was so mad. When I went home, my 12-year-old butt slayed that witch on MSN and never talked to her again after that. Story 11. Definitely realizing they cared more about what people thought of them than they cared about my well-being. Example, at a bar, had just ended a long-term relationship, was looking forward to a pub night with a friend. He invites his coworkers, one of whom, male, continuously negs me all night. The worst of which, that I heard, was him theatrically looking me, female, up and down, and saying to my friend that he should go for an upgrade once we get inside. Friend did not even bat an eye, let alone stand up for me, so I walked off into the night away from their BS and never spoke to them again. Story 12. I should have ended the friendship years ago, but it took 7 years for me to finally grow a pair and do it. She just kept going off on me and accusing me of stuff we both knew I didn't do. Would talk crap about me and blame me for any problems we had while playing the victim like she never contributed to our arguments, and wanted to be my best friend, only when she and this other girl weren't friends. A few months ago, I finally just cut her off after her harassing me all day about some stuff talking I didn't do, and calling me a witch and a toxic person, and then later in the same day trying to talk to me like nothing happened because it was actually someone else that spread the rumor. Lol, my bad. Story 13. Coming back from my kitchen and announcing they had fixed the thermostat in my fridge for me. Oh, really? I hadn't noticed anything wrong with it. Where did you study refrigerator maintenance? I didn't. What was the setting before you changed it? I don't remember. Within a week, everything in the fridge had rotted. That person was never invited over again. And adding up a few other things that had been off, I dropped the friendship. Story 14. Probably the day I introduced my, at the time, girlfriend to my friends, and one of them instantaneously started chatting her up and asked for her number. It wasn't the first time he had done it either, as he had done it to a few other guys before. The girl I was seeing at the time slapped him a good one, called him a chunt, and he fricked off. We never saw him again after that, as we told him he was a prick, and we couldn't be dealing with him anymore. This was 10 years ago now, when we were all 20 and 21. Story 15. My 2-year-old was diagnosed with cancer and had a 10% chance of survival. His godparents never bothered to visit in the hospital or at home. I told this person that if they were uncomfortable seeing my child this way, we could still meet up for coffee, as I needed a friendly distraction. This person told me they needed to be selfish because they just broke off a relationship. We were friends for 21 years. 2-year-old is now 9 years old and cancer-free. Story 16. When she told my entire Catholic school that I didn't know who the father of my baby was because I've been such a horse. I was 15 and I was in an abusive relationship. My boyfriend also heard the rumor she started and he beat me. When my friend saw what happened, she said I deserved it. Story 17. I was friends with this girl. We were pretty good friends. Then she accused me of putting photos of her up on 4chan, labeling her a chunt or something. I had no clue what 4chan was and told her I wouldn't do anything like that to anyone. She cursed me again. I said, don't ever speak to me again, blocked her numbers on MSN, Facebook, whatever, never spoke to her again. Click on one of the videos you see on the screen now, or a Karen will sue you.